Welcome to Vision Heart blog number 3. This time we're going to extend what we were talking about the last time, which had to do with the story of the elephant, the blind men being given a part of the elephant to feel and to find out what their impressions of the elephant was. Each one insistent that their part of the elephant was the entirety of the elephant. And we examined that hanging on to parts of the elephant or the bigger picture, hanging on to a single view of reality, does not give us the whole picture. So we're going to look at that a little bit more closely. We're going to work with that analogy, that story, and go in a little bit further into that idea of hanging on to your own part of the elephant and identifying what you see as reality as being just that part of the elephant. Well, there's certain things that could be considered when we're looking at this. Why aren't these gentlemen speaking to each other? They are, but they're arguing. Okay? There's a few things that could be done here. They could actually be more open-minded and talk back and forth to each other and say, my end is long and trunk-like, blah, 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 etc. Snake-like, blows wind and so on. But you're telling me that it's flat and it's really wide and it doesn't seem to have any end to it? Let's look at this. Maybe let's see if we can move closer to each other. Let's just see if, hey, can you touch my hand here? Okay, all right, there you are. Okay, so let's just, okay. Put your hand out. Each of us put our hand out and feel that side. Oh my goodness, that's what you're feeling? That's incredible. Because here, have a look at this. Here, and I hand over my trunk. And I hand it over to the next guy, and the guy who's along the side has an amazing, mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting epiphany when he gets a hold of the trunk. But he's thinking it's this big flat thing, and now all of a sudden his mind is blown, and we're standing there, both of us, thinking, okay, interesting. To make that leap, to actually make that leap, in itself is a major leap of consciousness. A major leap of consciousness, because this ties in with something that I think is the crux of the problem, and that is identity and identification. Okay, the problem is we have is identifying with our view. So on. This is probably something that we need, a part of our ego structure. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I can't tell you what this is all about, but it seems to make sense to me that from my observations, right from the time when I was a child, when I was a little boy on the street with my street chums, my first friends, one of the things that I actually got a very clear understanding of, even as a child, was how each of us little boys on the street identified with certain aspects of our existence. For example, my father's boat had an Evinrude motor on it. The guy down the street, his father thought that Evinrudes were junk, and he had a Johnson. Okay, Johnsons were the best boat. Evinrudes sucked. So this kind of thing, we learn to identify with how we're taught. We're taught. My father says this, I believe my father, that's what you do, and so on. So, and this is where people get the notion, well, that's how I grew up. That's what I was taught when I grew up, and so on. So my question is, okay, but I'm sure there's a number of things that you disagreed with your parents about that you don't hold on to now, and so on. And you didn't grow up to be a carbon copy of your parents. You are you, and you are very different, and so on. So when people say, I was raised a this, or I was raised a that, and that's how we did things, okay, yes, but I'm sure in many different ways as we grew up, we went beyond that. We stepped outside that. We went around it. We rejected it, okay? There are many different things that play into this. But this thing of identification, identifying with sports teams. Somebody was, I remember, like Toronto Maple Leafs or Chicago Red Wings or Hamilton Tiger Cats or Winnipeg Blue Bombers and so on. These were all teams that boys in the neighborhood identified with, probably because their fathers told them. Okay, my father happened to like the Leafs, somebody else's father liked this team, and so on. Or you had your favorite players and so on. You identified with them. Boys grow up getting hockey jerseys with their favorite players' numbers on them and so on. You are not this hockey player, but You want to identify with that hockey player. You want to identify with that boat motor. You want to identify with what your father tells you. It's something that starts with us at a very young age, where we identify with what we know, and so on. And we never really move beyond that. Maybe it would be interesting as kids, and this is part of growing up, I guess, is that we need to get to the point when we're adults. Adult thinking is where we start to differentiate ourselves from our parents, from our upbringing, from our conditioning, and start to see things in our own way, start to evaluate the world on our own experience. And this is necessary. This is absolutely necessary for us as adult beings to forge our own path. What on earth is that horrific mess of our teen years all about, but other than identifying with our own thinking, figuring out our own path, and so on, forging out against, in most cases, rebelling against our parents, going against the grain. I grew up at a time when our parents, all who had been through the war and the Depression, that's all they talked about was the war, the war, the war, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, and so on. So my generation grew up rebelling against war, rebelling against identification with this team. I'm a German, I'm an Englishman, I'm a Frenchman, I'm a this, and all that stuff. And as we grew up into the teen years, and you had the revolutions of the 60s and so on, we started to call that into question. We started to look at nationalism, and at least the war part of nationalism, as being ridiculous, and so on. And we really went against our parents, and so on. This is something that I think we need to do now with bigger things, with identifications with our nations, with identifications with political parties. People identify with political parties. I almost lost one of my closest friends many years ago because we had a political argument, and so on. My objection to the argument was so much, okay, I disagreed that he took a slightly different political view than mine. He was agreeing more with another party than the one that I liked. But what I found the biggest problem was that, and you see this with many different political arguments, is everything is expressed in absolutes. As soon as we express anything in absolutes, we're in trouble. We're in big trouble. And I think this is something we're going to have to examine in the future, is looking at the expression of absolutes. We can no longer, as a good friend of mine, Professor Paul Thompson, of late, once expressed in a seminar that he was teaching to his university class in philosophy, that we cannot make absolute statements, and so on. Everything they were looking at, an interesting thing, they were looking at all the traditional defenses throughout the centuries in philosophy of the proofs of the existence of God. Each one of them, every single one of them, they were able to demolish through philosophical argument, through philosophical analysis, and so on. At the end, Dr. Thompson asked the students, okay, what does this tell us? And the first student said that there's no such thing as God. He said, no. Anybody else? And then people started to get confused. The students all got very confused and befuddled because they were making these, you can't say this, you can't say that, and so on. Dr. Thompson said, no. He said, at the end, the only thing that can come out of this is that we can no longer give out absolute statements. We can no longer make absolute statements. I think that this is the beginning of wisdom. This is the beginning of seeing all parts of the elephant, looking at the different parts of the elephant and realizing that that trunk identification, that ear, the side, and the tail are singular identifications, singular points of view, and we need to break that down and start to see the others. Thank you very much.